So the style I've settled on when I'm taking a photo for a reference, or if I'm working from in a sitting, is to have a one strong light source coming across the face, ideally illuminating at least sort of 3/4 of the face, but then also having part of the face in shadow. So it just lends itself really, really well to glazing, because you've got an opportunity to use darker glazes in the shadow areas, and then highlights where the face is illuminated by the light source, and they balance really well. I still struggle when I'm painting a face just wholly in shadow. I haven't really actually worked out a way to do that yet, but I'm sure I'll have a go, because it's just the contrast that makes it work. So I'm just modelling the cheek here, where I was. And it's at this stage when everything starts to come together. You have to sort of suspend disbelief for a while, because it just does look very messy at first when you're sort of putting on the glazes. Then you've got velaturas mixes with white, but slowly everything starts to come together, and I'm mixing in what I have used as a glaze into the velatura, and the facial structure starts to take on a bit more shape and a bit more definition. So I'm just working over this transition area between the shadow around the nose and the highlight on the nose. Again, this is something that can just be adjusted later with a further glaze. I can darken it, I can lighten it with another highlight, but that's just infinite. I can keep going over until it works. For the purposes of the film, I'm trying to film, this is just as long as I would normally take to do the first glaze, roughly around an hour. This one did take a little longer, so it's about an hour and 20 minutes in all, in 4 parts. But for the purposes of it, I am rushing through it a little bit. No, not too much, but I could just see in some of the shadow areas, you can take a lot longer and go over it with more glazes. But again, you have to wait for those glazes to dry. So on my YouTube channel, the channel art shows a portrait that was done in a number of stages, and it starts with the grisaille. You can see the grisaille, and then you can see after certainly the first glaze, and then going on to maybe the fourth glaze, and there's a more subtle sort of gradual accumulation of layers, which is very beautiful, really. At this stage here, in the shadow tones, I've really gone in, quickly. They're quite dark, but possibly I will lighten them at a later stage. And that's very easy to do with very, very thin veils of velatura. Just working into the shadow areas around the mouth now. I haven't dared to touch the teeth at all. I find teeth really the most difficult thing to paint, because if you're not careful, they can really look overdone. So I leave them in this first glaze, and I'll go over them, with the finer details later. And so she's just left with utterly dazzling white teeth, which look great. Her teeth are white anyway, but it's just there are very subtle shadows in the teeth. I'm just not going to attempt yet. It's just that's for a later glaze, and I'll probably just use. It won't be black, but maybe there'll be a tiny bit of black with blue, red, bit of sap green, just to give the tiniest suggestion of a shadow on the tooth. But certainly towards around in the back of her mouth, in the sort of the molars and the canines, you can see, they're visible but they're in shadow. So it's just how to sort of maintain that so that you can see them, but yet they don't want to be overly prominent. Otherwise, it changes the whole character of her smile. One thing I've learned when painting lips is that they're a lot lighter than you think, and glazes do have a tendency to make everything a little bit darker. And that's one of the guidelines when I was reading about how to do grisaille. You just got to always be careful that when you finish the grisaille, that it's a couple of, in terms of the value scale, it's just a couple of grades lighter than the sort of intended finished result, because glazes, it's sometimes they're just pure colour, pure hue, but they'll still darken the grisaille. So you just got to make sure that it's not too dark to begin with. Obviously, if the lip's going to be in shadow, that's going to be very different. But just generally, here they're really illuminated, and so it's just being careful not to make them too dark as I paint them. And I'm using probably sometimes on my palette I use a rose madder or something, which is just a slightly sharper pink. But alizarin crimson and cadmium red work fine for me, and so I'm just sort of finding my way around here. But again, at the front of the lower lip, there it's really catches the light, so it's just a lot brighter. And I think in a later glaze, I do go back over it and lighten it again. And again, that's just one great reason for using the grisaille. I've done the drawing and I can just go back over it. As long as I don't lose the drawing, I can just work into it as many times as I like and lighten it and darken it. At this stage, I'm not going to dare touch the teeth, because I find teeth really one of the most difficult things to paint of all. There are shadows on the teeth, but I'll go over them in a later glaze. They're just so subtle that it just needs the tiniest suggestion. Anything more, and it's just really overdone. So I've got to just be really, really careful with that. So at the moment they're dazzlingly white, and they are dazzlingly white anyway, and they will be in the final portrait, but they do have just the tiniest suggestion of a shadow in them. But I'll attempt that. I'll have a go at that later. So just mixed in a little bit of sap green, and it's just interesting to watch about, because it's just, with that one mix I can go, I'm going over the whole face, just adding shadow tones, just cooling some of the shadow areas down, and use it to draw the eyebrows. Specifically I started doing the shadow around just in the sort of eye socket and the nose, but it applies everywhere. Using the brush to model the forms. I find it very enjoyable to start when the whole surface has paint all over it. It's just got a wonderful quality, and you can just really start to move it around. And the paint is oil paint specifically is a very beautiful thing when you're just using with a hog's hair brush, and it's all over the surface, and you could just start to sort of model each area. There's a moment in each painting I find where there's the paint's all over the surface, and so you can just model one area into another, and it's just got the oil paint has got such a sensual quality, and it sort of ripples and folds under the brush, particularly for me a hog's hair brush. It's just an area of reflected light around the jawline, and sort of rather than specifically, I think I will add a highlight in a minute, but I'm just using some of the darker glaze, because it just picks up around the cheek, and then the jawline just reflects the light as well, bounced off from elsewhere in the room. I've introduced a little bit of yellow into this mix, just for the area around the neck and the highlights. But again, I've found a use for the same yellow in the shadow of the nose. There's a yellow that's just on the top left of the palette, so I've got a bit of yellow, red, alizarin crimson. That area just picking up a bit more. Just lightening that shadow area, but adding some hue, a bit of colour as well. So after looking really patchy for a long time, when the initial glazes and velaturas were going on, the whole portrait is starting to feel like the first glaze is nearly there. I mean, I'm still going to work into it for at least another sort of 20 minutes. It's very interesting, just trying to create the shape of the cheek. It's not necessarily dark, and where it transitions from the highlight into the shadow, but it has, a lot of colour in it. So it's just finding ways that the colour will create the shape. If later I decide that these shadows are too warm, it's so easy to just put a very, very thin glaze of blue or green over the top and completely transform them. At the moment, most of the paint is there, so it's all about just modelling the transitions from highlight to shadow. You can see here that it's as much about brushing it off, brushing the paint off as it is putting paint on. So I'm moving it off the chin where the chin's much lighter. So I'd initially just put too much there, so I can just rub it away, brush it away with the hog's hair. It's got enough weight to do that, and then I've got a bit of blue now just going into the highlight. It's a little cooler around there, and this is something that I'll probably work into later with further glazes if I need to cool it down, if it's just a little bit too warm. And all around the mouth area, I think at the time, I was aware that it was quite warm, but just a little bit of blue. I don't know how well it picks up on the film. Well, this is a bit I worked into in later glazes because it's so difficult to do where the cheek's completely illuminated. It's just it's fully sort of in the highlight area, but it still has a sense of of the form, which gives part of her personality, and it's part of her smile. So it's finding a way just to suggest that ever so slightly without overdoing it. I mean, even if I left it like this at this stage, it's still very easy to go back over with a glaze and redeem myself. I've just gone over a little bit too much there, so that is something I want to correct at this stage.